My name's Dave Dubeau, founder of MoneyPartnerFormula.com, and this show is built for everyday real estate investors who are actively doing deals and looking to scale using other people's money. So if you're an active real estate investor and you want to get featured on this show to talk about your own real estate and capital raising experiences, then just go to daveinterviewsyou.com. Now let's get rolling with this episode, and remember to subscribe for daily interview content.
All right, guys, welcome to Property Profits Podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Kaminsky, filling in for Dave Dubeau. And if you've ever thought about turning a single family home into a cash flow powerhouse, well, today my guest, Linda Hayes, has not only mastered this in Edmonton, Alberta and Belize, but has sparked a new trend with laneway homes. Curious about her unique strategies in navigating changing interest rates? Stay tuned as we dive in here with Linda. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
So yeah, the trend is certainly the laneway homes. They've got a bunch of different names. Break it down for the people who maybe are still, I wouldn't say behind the trend, but there's a bunch of different names for these things. But essentially they are.
Sure. So laneway homes is what Canada Revenue Agency calls them in Canada. But other than that, they have lots of names. They're sometimes called, like in Edmonton, garden suites, nanny flats. In the US, they're also called ADUs, which is accessory dwelling units. So that's a few of the different names. But basically, what you're doing with a laneway home is basically taking your single family home investment on a lot. And because land is so expensive, you're adding a secondary income source onto your property. So in the Edmonton market, when I started investing back in 2006, one single family home would cash flow. Well, today it doesn't. And even for the past number of years, it didn't. So I started first with basement suites. So I'd have two income sources. And then I kind of went, a lot of my tenants don't like that. So putting a garden suite as a separate building in the backyard, if you have a big enough lot, tenants love it. It's great for Airbnb. And so that's kind of some of the things that are really fantastic.
Yeah, you can separate it. I am not a fan of secondary units. I don't like, you might as well, you're taking a perfectly good 1940s or 1950s, bungalow and putting people underneath you. And it's just like, that wasn't the dream we were sold. But I do love the idea of having that secondary unit. And there's a lot of companies that are coming up where they're able to like drop them in the backyard. I saw that in California. They're doing these like prefabricated ADUs that they just bring in and drop onto the properties. And so I could see that really taking off because there's two things. Density. Yeah, we need more density for the population as it grows in these centers. But it also allows you to have an income suite, but also for the people that are aging in place. Like you could have no stairs, grade level access for your parents. They could stay close to the house, but still have their own space. And I think that's really important about the trend. So what got you into that trend in the first place? Like that's not an easy thing to do, especially not back in the day, because they really, the codes are still catching up.
That's a very good point. So when I first started doing garden suites, I was kind of, that's what they're called in Edmonton, so I'll often call them that now. But I was doing basement suite homes, and even that was a challenge initially. So I had a great builder, and it's a big builder in Edmonton called Lincolnberg Homes, and they didn't even do basement suites because they're a big builder. They're like, no, the bylaws are crazy. We don't know if it'll work. And I said, okay, well, can I get you to rough stuff in? And they said, sure. If you know the rules of how to do it, we'll do it for you. I ended up doing it, getting it approved, and they went, wow, this is actually easy. So they started doing it. So once I wanted to do a laneway home or a garden suite, I went to them and said, hey, I want to do this. And they're like, absolutely. We know you know what you're doing. So we'll work with you to do a pilot one. And now the neighborhood I'm in Edmonton as an investor has, I don't even know how many. At one time, I used to tell people, oh, wow, there's 20. Well, now it's the second most popular neighborhood in Edmonton that has garden suites, just because of my network of investors that have decided this kind of makes the most sense. And the way I found it actually was just coincidence. We had one neighborhood that had a show home with it was kind of a back attached garage home, which was it was a special neighborhood, and it had a little breezeway, they called it, in between the house. Through the backyard, there was this little hallway that led to their garage and a stairwell upstairs to a suite. And I went, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. And I want to do this, but my lots don't have that that's not a common theme. But I said, why not build a separate building? Could we do it? So basically in Edmonton, it's pretty, I would say, pretty good in terms of bylaws. And actually, I would say it's at the forefront in Canada, probably, for
It is,
allowing.
yeah.
Yeah. And
They
so
are
that's one
the
of
most
the
progressive.
Yeah, and we have lots of investors. A lot of my friends that have investment properties right in my neighborhood actually are from Calgary. And then there's even people from Vancouver that are investing, not just because of the prices, but because of the flexibility. And actually, I'm going to be doing a YouTube video talking about the fact that now we can actually do, not that you would like this, but a basement suite and a garden suite, where when I was doing it, it was just a house and a garden suite, or a house with a basement suite. Now, I do sometimes meld it together. Well, I'll do a little bit of an in-law suite in the basement, but for one family. So if you say have your adult child and you want them to have their own kitchen, you could do that in the basement and then have your garden suite as a separate income property.
Mhm.
Or do it. I mean, some people say, well, I just want to live in the garden suite and I'm going to rent the house out, which that's a
Yeah.
great thing for young people to do, because then they have way more rental income from that main house and they can live a lot more affordably.
And you don't have to occupy, find a bunch of roommates. You can actually have like an apartment, but you're actually not the mortgage helper. They're the mortgage helper in the family, in the house. So yeah, one thing that I always would talk to my investor friends in Edmonton, they'd show me these pictures and it'd be like, look, I'm doing a fourplex in this single family home. And they would show me videos and I'd be like, this is wild. There's no way that they would let us get away with that here in Manitoba. And they really are paving the way as far as density and regulations. They're much more progressive than a lot of the places in the country, which I think is why it has had so many investors going. Like people from Winnipeg go there, people from Vancouver, everywhere in Canada, people are investing in Edmonton. The inventory is good, but I think more than the inventory, the codes and the permits are just conducive. Well, also the rent board is a little bit more landlord friendly than in some other places. So
That is definitely a good point as well.
we've got Edmonton. Let's put a pin in that. How does someone such as yourself end up in Belize doing tiny homes is what you've started to focus on for
Yes.
remote workers who are maybe trying to get away for the winter and do their sales job or whatever from the beach.
Yes. Well, I actually really hate winter. So that was my big thing that I started thinking about. And one of my friends in my real estate group in Edmonton said, if you're thinking of buying international property, because I was thinking US, a lot of people go to Florida or somewhere,
Hmm.
and even Florida for me or Arizona, it's a little cold in the winter. And so anyway, my real estate friend said, oh, you should listen to the real estate radio guys. So Robert Helms is the host of the real estate radio guys in the US, and he's in
Hmm.
Texas. And so I thought, well, let's start listening to him. If he does international investing, because we have great, obviously, real estate people in Canada, but they're not really talking about other markets very often. So once I started listening to Robert and Russ, who I now know personally, but I started
Hmm.
listening to them and realized they invest in Belize. There's also other areas that they talk about on their website, but I thought, Belize, let me look at it. Oh, wait, we can fly direct from Calgary and direct from Toronto most of the year. So that's the one I wanted to investigate first. So I bought all the kind of books I could find. There was a book called Easy Belize that I read about and looked at which investing market made the most sense. I also often use AirDNA. So AirDNA is a software you can subscribe to check different investing markets to see what they think is a good investing market. So not only knowing Robert Helms invests in Belize, who's a really good, a really good resource. He offers tours called Belize Discovery Tours. So
Hmm.
during COVID, I actually registered interest in the Belize Discovery Tour with Robert. And then I realized, wait, he owns a Hilton hotel in Belize. So I
Hmm.
ended up buying a lot 4 doors down from his Hilton hotel, because his hotel has different separate units. And I bought that, built 2 little tiny homes. Right now I have tenants in the 2 homes that are paying in total 2,600 US a month plus utilities. So it's actually better than people would think. And that's one of the things I talked to Robert about quite a bit, because he's now a friend of mine, about tiny homes kind of being a new trend, because people want they don't want to live inside, especially in a place like Belize where it's really nice weather all the time. So I'm in a little 1-bedroom apartment right now because I actually, living in my little tiny home, I did it for 3 months. And then I realized I could make more money doing that, renting it out because it's in a gated community, and renting something cheaper myself. So that's kind of what I'm doing in Belize. But the numbers definitely make sense, especially if you can rent to people. I don't rent long-term here. It's more people, I mean, the people that are renting now, they're for 6 months, but they're
Hmm.
building a spa in the Hilton Hotel. So they needed
Hmm.
a rental while they're building their spa. Other times I've had people that are remote workers. So one of my last tenants, they actually rented both of the homes, lived in one, and used the other small one for an office because he works remote. So remote working is huge in Belize, as is obviously snowbirds and retirees, which isn't really
Hmm.
the market I'm focused on because they typically want houses like they had in Canada or the US. But these
Yeah.
nomad workers, they're a little different. I even have a client from France who wants to build some tiny homes specifically for nomad workers, but she's going to build a small home for herself, and she's coming all the way from France to invest in Belize. So
Hmm.
it's a really cool market. It's a Commonwealth, it's English speaking, and it's the only country in the Caribbean that's English speaking. So that's the other thing. And I guess the other really important thing is that we have freehold property title here. So that's not the case in all countries. So it's a thing that you need if you're an investor and you really want to protect yourself.
Yeah, because essentially a lot of these places you can't really own the land. You can own the structures, but in Belize, you're saying you can own the dirt and the structures with the title.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have an American client that said, where does it say the property is free from liens? And I'm like, well, freehold title, that's what it means. It means that you own the title to the property. So we work with lawyers here in Belize that are real estate attorneys to be sure that the title is unencumbered and things like that, just like you would do in Canada or the US.
Hmm. Yeah, I looked it up. It's a 9-hour flight from the middle of Canada. So you can definitely get there. And, that I like what you said too, is like people will typically pick Florida or they'll pick Texas. They'll pick these places along the southern United States, which is nice. And I do know what you mean, though. I was just recently in Florida, and it was not warm. It wasn't that warm, It
Right.
was like, yeah, 20, and it got down to like 12 or 15. And so it can be nice. You can have some great days, some nice days, but it doesn't quite hold that, summer weather in the winter. It's still a little bit of a winter weather system. So do you plan on at some point becoming permanent resident there? Do they keep you there in the sense that do you have to come back at a certain amount? Like, is there a limit to your
That's a
traveling?
that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that. I actually just got permanent residence in Belize. Finally, I have my card as of last month. Now, the way it works, it's an interesting thing. A lot of people say, well, you can't stay more than 6 months. Well, that's a US rule. That's not a
Mhm.
Canadian rule. That's a US rule. If you're a Canadian, you go to the US, you have to leave like
Mhm.
after your
Mhm.
6 months. Now, Belize doesn't have such a rule. Belize has a rule that you come to Belize, you have a 30-day visitor visa. After the 30 days, you pay $100 US, 200 Belize, because it's 2-to-1 exchange, and you can stay another 30 days. If you do that for 12 months straight, without leaving more than 14 days, you can apply for permanent residence, which I did. Once you do
Mm.
that and it's approved, you now are able to work in the country. Once you have that for 5 years, you could become a citizen. But the first year is kind of tricky because you do have to stay. Now, I did it during 2021. Canada was shut down. It was the
Mhm.
perfect time to do it. I couldn't go
Mhm.
back to Canada without a hotel quarantine. So I did one trip to Seattle to dog sit just to get away because living in Belize, it's a small country. I mean, it's about
Mhm.
the size of
400,000 people.
Massachusetts. Yeah,
Mhm.
400,000 people. So the amenities aren't quite the same as you have in, say, Canada or the US. But once I had the permanent residence, actually, as soon as I put the application in after 12 months, I was allowed to leave whenever I wanted, right? So that was
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
was a great thing. And there is no 6 month limit. There are some rules on medical. And if you leave Canada more than 6 months, You kind of are cut off from your medical and you have to come back for a certain amount of time before you get it back. Now, for me, I think it was because I was during COVID. I don't even know why, but for whatever reason, as soon as I went back to Canada, I went to the doctor and it was all covered. And now I go back and forth enough that I always go to the doctor, and I have a Blue Cross medical plan. And I got the one that allows you to travel more up to 90 days and have travel insurance. And I never stay in Belize more than 90 days before I'm back in Canada. So, I mean, it works perfectly for me. I still have my Canadian medical. Other people, maybe they don't, right? They're in Belize permanently. And I know lots of people like that. And they can buy an international health plan or a Belize medical plan if they're doing that.
Yeah, and I think the main tone is that if you're going to move, that you should investigate and be prepared for the things that we take for granted here in Canada, like the healthcare and the amenities and things like that. So, like any trip, be prepared. And that's the thing I love about this podcast is we get people coming on all sorts of different. I had a guy who also invests in Belize, but he also invests in Dubai. And so as soon as he broke the framework around I'm a Canadian investor, and he dropped the I'm a Canadian, comma, investor as well. Once you're able to separate that mentality, he also had property in the United States, and I'm an investor and I'm also Canadian. So as long as you can break that down so that you're not just simply looking at everything and, oh, what province am I going to invest in next? There's lots of opportunity all over the place. And as if you're watching on the video, better weather, she's got the background going, obviously a background, but we get the idea, the pictures and the videos from there. It seems to be a trending topic. Let me ask you this. It's not obvious why Belize became a trending thing, but was it, you had mentioned his name, Ken, who was it, Robert?
Robert Helms.
Was he the one to put the seed in the ears of the Canadians? How did you decide Belize? Like, who said it to you first? How did you get, because I've heard other people, and I consider myself kind of networked into the Canadian real estate business, but it was like a side investor who was like, oh, I'm probably going to go to Belize and do this. Why and where did that information come to you?
Well, like I said, because I had someone who knew Robert, they had been on his. So what Robert does, he does this thing called an investment summit, and it's a 1 week long investor focused conference, basically. And it's always been on a cruise ship. Okay. So my friend Shanna and her husband Ash had been on that thing, I guess, 6 times. So they knew them personally, knew they were invested in Belize. So obviously that's why I reached out to them, is because I knew somebody who knew them. So for me, that was the first person. There is also there's a guy with Remax that has a really successful marketing YouTube channel about Belize. His dad, his name is Will Mitchell. So I don't know if you've heard of Will Mitchell. He's from Calgary. So he is a great marketer, and his dad developed Mahogany Bay, which is where the Hilton is, as well as the Secret Beach community. So because of that, he can sell a lot of property, and he does. Now, that's a topic for another day, but basically in Belize, realtors, there's no licensing. So it's a real challenge here to find the right kind of property. So that's why meeting Robert for me was great, because he kind of educated me once I did his Belize tour on the differences here. So it doesn't matter if someone's with a big realty company or if they say they, know what they're talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, because there's no licensing. And the other thing is there's no MLS here. And that's the same in many countries. So I have a lot of clients that reach out to me now that I work with Keller Williams Belize, that will basically say, hey, I've seen your YouTube videos and you're the only one that talks about some of the challenges buying property in Belize or living in Belize. Everyone else shows the great boats and the fishing and the scuba diving and all these great things, but doesn't talk about the fact that, hey, some realtors only show their own listings and they don't sell anything else. Or the fact that, getting title can take a really long time, but as long as you have a lawyer, you'll get it. So those are the things, I guess, that helped me find Belize, was talking to Robert and kind of figuring out the true things and the challenges with it. But again, YouTube is a great resource for people thinking of investing elsewhere, but take anything you see online with a grain of salt. What I tell my clients or my viewers on YouTube is, do not buy anything without first coming to Belize. Now that sounds, does that sound obvious to you? Like, would you buy property
I
with?
give people this, I give them a slightly bit of different advice. I say before you decide to buy and own property, transact property there first. Like, you might not have to like land in a city somewhere in the States, but nothing's stopping you from making an offer and calling some agents and playing from a remote location. And then if things get serious, you're probably going to have to go down there. But don't blindly buy property in places anywhere. That's
Right.
just my advice is like you need boots on the ground is going to be important. And if you have someone on the ground, get them to take a drive by or take a walk by because you can definitely. I've heard so many stories from Canadians buying in the United States primarily where they bought, the standard story, a piece of swampland, and it's just
That happens here
watch
also.
out, watch out.
And there's two comments I'll make on that. So Belize, when there's no licensing, they don't have to disclose things to you. And if you can't really sue anyone, it's going to take, I don't even know. My broker here at Keller Williams said it might take 4 to 6 years to even get your case heard. Hence, it's not good. So I tell people to buy property here, you have to see it in rainy season, not just in dry season, because it might look great in February when you come, but it's
Mhm.
different in October. So that's a big thing in a country where you have a rainy season, right? Is it can be swampland later, which you don't know. So yeah, there's things like that. And then there's things such as in Belize, if you want to do Airbnb, you need a hotel license. Not an
Mhm.
Airbnb license or a business license like we need in Edmonton, but an actual hotel license. So just like the Hilton needs, for me to do Airbnb, I need to do the exact same things, like have a
Mhm.
fire exit plan, even though I have a tiny home, have all the
Mhm.
same things. So have, pool rules, even though it's one house. So these are things that realtors typically don't tell their clients. And that's why I tell people that even if you have someone that says they are boots on the ground, if they're not telling you these things, they're really not representing you. They're representing the seller. So that's why I say, if you have
Mhm.
boots on the
Mhm.
ground, just make sure it's not a salesperson, right?
Yeah,
Make sure it's
a
somebody else.
contractor, someone with a
Property
non-code.
manager.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
property manager is great. I have a great property manager on Ambergris Key where I've invested, as well as in Placencia where I also live right now. And they will tell you like, oh, don't buy property here because I can't find a tenant for you, and this is why. But
Mm.
the realtors are not going to tell you that. I shouldn't say
No,
all
because
that. I mean, some realtors do, others do not.
it's their interest to sell property. That's their loyalty lies with the seller and rarely with the buyer. That's not how the game has really ever been played. Now let's switch gears right before we're running a little long, but I think this
Yeah.
is worthwhile. So we're gonna stretch this one out a few extra minutes. Um, how do you finance property out of like how do you finance property as a Canadian investing in Belize for the people listening at home?
That's a great thing. So we can't get bank financing in Belize as a foreigner. So what a lot of people do, say you want to buy one home, what you can
Mhm.
do is probably use a HELOC on one of your Canadian properties. And that's what I did.
Mhm.
So that's the simple way to do it. If you have equity in a property, use that. Now there is land available with developer financing, and there's also seller financing opportunities. And if you have a buyer's agent, they can help you with that. The other thing you can do is syndication, which obviously is something you guys do a lot. So we have a lot of
Mhm.
big syndicators that I've met through the real estate, the investor summit with Robert Helms, who do invest in Belize through syndication groups. So they'll buy a huge parcel of different properties in a syndication deal where they bring other investors in. So that is one of
Mhm.
the more popular ways if you're wanting to do a bigger deal versus just doing a single family home or a single family condo. There's one developer here who actually owns a bank in Belize. So that's an exception where you can actually buy one of their properties and finance it with their bank. So there
Mhm.
is slight opportunities to do it, but syndication, which is private money lending basically, is the way to go.
Probably the easiest one is the one you mentioned right off the top, which is if you're in Ontario or you have a house in Vancouver, chances are, because I'm, as the conversation goes here, I'm just browsing a couple of the things, and it looks like things are ranging, and maybe you can touch on the numbers, but it looks like things are ranging somewhere between like 85 and 205. That seems to be, I mean, I'm looking at things under 200 granted, but there is stuff here that you could get. Um, I mean, it's hard to say I'm blind looking into the MLS here, but
Yeah.
you could find 150 or 250,000 in equity in a home equity line, pay your 6 or 7 or 8%, a loan to yourself, buy some property in another country. I mean, it's totally, they're going to give you the same interest rate these days anyway. It's going to be 7% at the bank. So you might as well take your HELOC at 7 or 8%, and they don't really ask any questions about what you do with that. You could go to Vegas with it if you wanted to, but maybe better is to buy a piece of property that's going to actually provide you some future value. So tell me about the numbers real quick, and then we'll touch on a couple more questions for you here. So tell me about the numbers on just an average deal that someone's going to maybe turn into an Airbnb somewhere.
Okay, well, thinking about Belize specifically,
Mhm.
is that what you're meaning?
Yeah.
Okay, well, for example, there's condos available in the Best Western that's on Ambergris Key. So I have a lot of clients that are investors that have bought condos in there around the 120,000 US mark. And now, if you put it in the Best Western, they take a huge portion of it, but you can also long-term rent. So to just give some numbers, the rent in there is usually around 1,100 US a month plus utilities. So it might not be the highest ROI type investment, but it is in a place where you might want to retire someday, and it at least
Mhm.
covers the costs, right? So if you have a HELOC, you just have to run your numbers, do a cash flow budget, which a lot of my investor clients have done. And that's kind of one of the types of properties that makes sense because it's at an affordable price point. Other people buy a piece of land, which they can finance, and land prices range anywhere from 50,000 upwards of over 200,000. And depending what you buy, in my case, I like to buy a piece of land. For example, one of my clients just bought a half-acre parcel of land. She's going to build a house for herself, and then she's going to build 2 tiny homes for Airbnb. So her land price, just to give you an idea, was 220,000 US. If she wanted to, she could have financed that for 10 years. So that would have helped because that could have been for her personal house. She has other cash from France that she's going to use, but then she's going to build her 2 tiny homes. So the one thing to note is obviously if you can't get financing the traditional way, your ROI is going to be a bit less as an investor. But if you want that, great, I have a place to stay and I Airbnb it when I'm not there, and I can do some long-term rentals to cash flow, that's probably the way to go.
Okay, so the let's shift gears right before the end here, and I'm going to ask you, Robert Kiyosaki has a book, Unfair Advantage. What comes easy to you that other people might find difficult to do?
I would say analyzing the numbers because I'm an accountant by trade, a CA, CPA. So whenever I look at an investment, it's not emotional for me. When I decided to buy a property in Belize or I decide to do a property in Edmonton, I run all the numbers through a budget template to make sure it makes sense. So I think that would be one of the things that I can do that maybe other people struggle a little with.
Yeah, doing the numbers. I mean, some people napkin number it and just blow like breeze through it and maybe regret that. So do the numbers. Research is the only thing in real estate that's free. You can research all day to the end of days and you can ask all the questions. And it's the most valuable thing because it's free and it could cost you everything. So make sure you do your numbers. All right. Well, I'm sure people are going to want to know this. If people want to connect with you, they want to find out more, they want to become your neighbor down there and start investing. How do they find you? What should they do?
They should actually just give me a phone call. My number is 402-448-4508. And I'm sure you could put that in the description of the video too. And of course, look me up on YouTube, Linda in Belize, if you just want to see kind of what Belize is all about.
Okay, cool. Well, I really appreciate the insight. And, for people freezing in the weather up here, I'm sure they're going to be interested in seeing what the weather is like down there. Well, I really appreciate your time, Linda.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. And until next, guys, we'll see you on the next episode.
Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. And as always, if you want to listen to more daily interview content, make sure you subscribe. And if you're an active real estate investor and you're doing deals and you'd like to get featured on this show, then just head over to daveinterviewyou.com. Now at moneypartnerformula.com, we help real estate investors to create a process for predictably getting capital so they can do more deals without relying on hard money lenders or the banks. We do this by building them a private capital marketing system. Now, if you want help turning yourself into a big money capital attraction machine, then book a call with our team to see how we can help. Just visit moneypartnerformula.com to find out more. All right, take care, and we'll see you on the next interview.